Hey everyone, I'm Jeremy.
I'm Rachel.
We're here on Chris's Corner
Without
Chris. The namesake. And it's week 2. And what's really encouraging me this week, Rach, is how many of you have decided to step into small group who are new to the community, because it's a big step to do that.
It's amazing. It can feel like a big step to just go on the website and sign up for a small group, but to actually get there on a Monday or Tuesday night and walk into a home that you've never been in, meet people who you've never met before, it's
Totally.
big. And we're just really excited that you've decided to take this next step and join a community.
For me, what it says is that there's a lot of people at the Way who are really serious about growing in community and maybe more specifically growing in Jesus alongside of other people.
Yeah.
Like there's an awkwardness in the first few weeks of small group. And that's why we just try to provide really strong icebreaker questions, because there's ice to break, you know? And, but just really speaks to me of the seriousness there is in the community to go, we want to go deep, we want to grow in relationship. And so we commend you. And we're super encouraged by all the people connecting into small groups. We get to hear from the different small group pastors from across Vancouver, North Vancouver, and just so fun to hear about the excitement there is in living rooms and in online spaces. So before we get into summarizing the content, we want to just give you a couple of important announcements. And so Rach, why don't you tell everyone about Alpha?
Right. Alpha is something that you probably hear us talk a lot about. We love Alpha. Chris just finished talking about evangelism as part of our series. And Alpha really is an awesome way to live into that value and invite a friend who may not have a lot of context to the Christian faith. And we ask questions like, is there more to life than this? And what is the purpose of life? Who is Jesus? Why did he die? And so we just wanted to make sure that's on your radar. It's starting on September 29th. Thursday, we're hosting one in Vancouver and then one on the North Shore as well.
Yeah, 6:30 p.m., dinner provided. We are talking a lot in this series that we're in about intentionality. And maybe one area you want to be intentional is going like, I have some friends I'd love to invite to that space, or I'd love to or maybe you're like, we are talking about God, but you just recognize that conversation needs more intentionality. Alpha can be a great space to continue that conversation and have a rhythm around it. And so encourage you to invite somebody out to Alpha. Excited for that. Also want to highlight that we have weekly prayer happening also in North Vancouver at 12 p.m. And then every week here at our offices downtown, 1155 Thurlow Street. It's a pretty easy address to memorize. And we're just in the front lobby area, 7 a.m., praying for our city. And so again, as we think about like intentional rhythms and the kind of people that we want to be committed to prayer, all these things, we'd love to invite you out to prayer if that works for you. The big idea of these videos, as you know, but for everyone else's sake, is to invite you into a conversation or to prompt a conversation about the things that we're talking about on a Sunday morning. So we, every Sunday, open the Bible. We're really committed to teach the Bible clearly and talk seriously about what God's calling us to be as his people, what he says in his word. And then, but in these spaces, we want to invite you into a conversation about what does it actually mean for us to take God's word, to take what he's calling us into, and then go figure out what does that look like for my Monday to Friday.
Right.
I actually just had lunch with a really good friend right before coming to film this. And we were just talking about this basic question that is kind of like, okay, I believe these things, but what difference do they actually make in my life? Like I can intellectually agree with these ideas even, but like, how does my life look different from my friend who doesn't believe these things? And that's such a good question. And in small groups, we actually want to talk about real life and taking God's word and his call and then going, but what does it look like to actually live in obedience to Jesus in all of life, in work, with family, in school, all that. So we hope that you can have great conversations even this evening and then ongoing about, how do we learn to follow Jesus together? What does that actually look like in our city and in our lives? And tonight what we want to do, it's week 2 of small group. We want to do a little bit of a recap of actually the last 3 weeks. So this, you mentioned, Chris just talked about evangelism. The week before, Jason talked about making disciples. And the week before that, I talked about being devoted to prayer. And all these things are things that we feel like as God's people, we are called to engage in. Rach, why don't you talk about the one that for you stood out the most from those 3? Maybe not stood out the most, but for you where you're like, this is actually hearing that and then doing something with it's changed my life a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you're like me, you've likely sat in church these past 3 weeks and have taken in the teaching and you've gone, oh, I agree with this. I love this. I want to be a person devoted to prayer. I want to be someone who makes disciples. But that next step is really hard. What do I do? How does my Monday to Friday look different? Like rhythm wise and practically wise. And I think prayer for me has kind of been the biggest shift. It's like, oh, I can put it in my calendar. You're starting your day with prayer. You're ending your day with prayer. And it's a really practical way to be like, I want my rhythms of my day to reflect the values that I want to hold. And so if I really do believe that prayer does something, how is that going to translate into my day to day? And so that's the kind of question I'm asking myself.
I love it. You mentioned that after hearing Jason's talk, you were like, you and somebody that you're walking with in life, you invited them to come like early to small group and you're going to spend some extra time praying together.
Yeah.
I love that. For me, I heard Jason's talk on making disciples and I was like, I have these friends and for a long time we've talked about like, we all want to go deeper in God and this, a couple specific friends were like, I really do want to get more serious about this in my day to day. Like, what does it actually mean to follow him? And I just realized we keep having these conversations randomly, like spread out throughout months. And I was like, I can make space if they want to enter into the space to just open the Bible with these friends who I love. I love talking to about all sorts of stuff. And so I just took a step, was like, hey, do you want to do this? And lo and behold, it was an easy thing to make happen. They're like, yeah, let's do that before work. Let's just crack the Bible open and spend 45 minutes talking about, are we following Jesus?
Right.
How are we growing and following Jesus together? So, so we do want to encourage you to have conversation about the things that we've talked about. It's been a lot of material. And so questions that your discussion leaders have are questions like I just asked Rach, like of these three things, what stands out to you? What do you feel called into? And I talked about this word intentional before, and it is a good word to kind of summarize the message we'd love for you to hear from this whole series. We want to invite you to be intentional about these things that you may think like, yeah, I do want to be about those things, but to be more intentional in them. And so, for example, with prayer, like Rach was giving some practical examples, but with prayer, it was an invitation to be devoted to prayer, to go like, okay, I might believe that intercessory prayer is important, but am I devoted to it in my life? I talked about like, there's a lot of things we're devoted to, a class, a relationship, raising children. Am I devoted to prayer? So I want to encourage you to have a conversation about, okay, what does devotion to prayer look like? How can we carve out space? Jason talked about being intentional and devoted to making disciples. And so actually going, I might believe that's the Great Commission or that's like Jesus' primary command for his disciples, but am I doing that? Do I even know what that means for me to actually make a disciple? And then go, is anything about my life intentional to actually accomplish that goal? And then Chris talked about evangelism, actually witnessing to the good news of Jesus, sharing our story about what Jesus has done in our lives and being bold with the message that we believe is actually true, most ultimately true in the universe. And so you might ask yourself like, am I being intentional with evangelism? Am I sharing that message? When's the last time I shared that message? When's the last time I shared my story? And am I like looking at my week and my conversations and actually planning out when I can open up my mouth to share about those types of things? And so obviously so much material to look at, so many different ways the conversation could go, but excited for you to talk about this tonight and to continue to talk about these things in the weeks to come.
Small groups are such a great place to ask those questions, even like on a Monday and Tuesday night when you meet as a group. What are some ways you can be intentional about developing rhythms within the small group and within your own lives individually, kind of as you leave small group? I think that'd be a great place to start this conversation tonight.
Yeah. And then the other thing that we believe is that you'll also get to have conversations as a small group and go, yes, individually leaving, but also as a community. How can we lean into these values together? So we love you tons. We'll talk soon. Hope you have an amazing discussion today.
Bye.